I visited Eric in his studio behind the mask, and Eric is an award-winning artist, arts educator, author, and Fulbright scholar.
Many artists will tell you that the studio is a laboratory of human identity, of human soul. It's how it's our temple. The temple of art is where we learn how to be ourselves, how to create our identities, how to create our grand statement to the world.
I wanted to learn about masks and the human identity, and we had a deep discussion for an hour and a half, and this video is just a small snapshot of that larger conversation.
We are all burdened by our mysterious identities, right? From the moment that we come out of the womb, one of the first functions, unbidden, is to identify the faces of those around us. And we come to recognize those first great faces as, mommy and daddy and some of the figures that will influence us for the rest of our lives, that we actually internalize in a normal process of growth on many levels. So we learn from an early age that the other is us. So, but of course, then we walk into a culture that starts to divide us, that starts to pigeonhole us, that starts to define us. They define us based on gender, on age, race, and any other number of characteristics that are really superficial, that most people know don't describe the fullness of who we are and what we contribute. So I think that really we spend our lives learning the lesson of our connectedness together. Like we really, it's a very strange process. So the mask is a tool for identity play. It's a way to break that assumption that this is who we are, this is what we look like, this is how you should respond to me. The fascination for that wild side, for the untamed side, for the brutal side. There is a fascination with that, even though we are civilized and we want to be nice, but yet we feel the urge of our wild, untamed selves. And I think it's our responsibility to examine this carefully. This is part of us just as much as anything good. So we have to face that in order to refine the raw energy of that into good. This is the triumph of human consciousness, is that we're not just creatures of habit and impulse. And again, the mask can help to play with that. This is the mask becomes a window to explore identity.
While talking about masks and identity, we also spoke about how identity play can change with age. Children are often able to become one with the masks and explore new identities. However, this ability can diminish with age.
Now, when people get older, well, people get more self-conscious and they pick characters that are more in line with what might be age appropriate. And maybe they want to be seen more as, sexy or debonair or something. So you see the choices become more limited. And even though as adults, the opportunity for socially sanctioned transformation, you'd think that it would be welcomed and embraced and celebrated, that in fact you don't. People actually shy away from really expressing themselves. So the reason I tell this is that people need to practice to let go. You don't just put on the mask and all of a sudden they unleash their inner personalities, their inner selves. That also takes lots of practice.
How do you practice that? Like, do you just maybe in your backyard you put it on and then you just try a different dialect, or what do you do so that you get in the zone and you merge with this mask?
Well, there's many traditions. Now you'll find mask work within theater. Now it's primarily in European theater or in theater of other cultures, but as far as in European cultures, less now. Finally, a little bit more in American culture these days. But for example, the Lecoq School in Paris. Now, Jacques Lecoq developed a school where actors would go, and most European actors have gone through some sort of Lecoq training, and where they use the mask, they go through using the neutral mask, the larval mask, character masks, other masks, to learn how to be more expressive in their bodies. So this European tradition was really trying to embody different characters and transformation through the body by, again, breaking the tyranny of our faces and using these masks as tools to develop more dexterity and depth in our physical expression. So there are many Lecoq-trained teachers. There's the Del Arte School in Northern California. There are traditional mask forms in take Balinese dance. I know there's a Balinese master I worked with who does residencies at, say, Holy Cross College in Worcester, and he teaches topeng. Topeng is the Balinese word for mask, and he teaches them, music. Because the music is really inseparable from the dance, inseparable from the mask, the costumes. Commedia dell'arte, an Italian art form with the different archetypes, different character archetypes that come from different regions of Italy. There are a few commedia companies here, so someone can learn about the mask. But there are particular styles of masks and particular stylizations of movement. You learn all those stock characters and how to move them. Japan, the no dance, performing with the no mask is very, very stylized and, many hundreds of years old traditions. And the movement there is even more distinct. And there's a particular methodology and philosophy around the use of the mask, the way it plays with light. For example, most people, when they think of the no mask, well, they might think of the horned, like Hanya mask, but often people will think of the female face, the onna, right? That oval female face with that very broad or light-colored face. So the movement is very slow in no, so that it plays with the light. So imagine the light shining from above, and as the face tilts down, the shadow under the eye begins to slowly move down the face. And this creates an effect that the eyes are closing, or that the figure is sad or crying. And as that face lifts up and the shadow recedes, it's called brightening the face of the mask in the technique. And it again looks like it's waking up from slumber, or that it's becoming happy. It's seeing the light in some way. And it feels almost like, even though it's a fixed visage, that face is animated and the eyes are opening and that the emotion is shifting. And then you play more on your own. But certainly that shouldn't stop anybody from playing anyway. You can find a lot on YouTube these days.
Next portion after the lectures in my ceremony will be that people will just try to make these masks, and many people will not have ever done anything. And the question, I guess, is like, if you're given the task of, okay, make a mask that allows you to do identity change, some people will be like, what do I do? What are different avenues? I think you had briefly touched on, like, maybe mythology, or maybe some negative aspect of yourself that you want to transform. Are there other, like, general categories that people can start thinking about as they're thinking of what should I express?
That's a big topic. That's a lot to consider.
Yeah.
Spontaneously, and in a short time, and without technique. So, and we can talk more about that after this, because I've spent a large part of my life demystifying process. So I think people love to engage in the process, and so some of the different categories that one might consider when creating a character. You have gender, right? What are the qualities? What are the iconographic qualities of maleness, femaleness, right? Skulls are different, and there are certain peoples in the world, for example, in sub-Saharan West Africa, in Ghana, the high rounded forehead of a woman that's more characteristic of female skulls is really valued and seen as very feminine. They even will sometimes shave the hairline back to accentuate that beautiful high round forehead. Now obviously not all women have high round forehead, but it is seen as a general feminine shape, whereas the male skull is more angled, bigger brow, bigger cheekbones, jawbone. And so age is another. Young, middle-aged, and old, like the maiden, the mother, the crone. So emotions, there have been 6 emotions identified by Ekman and Friesen over at University of California back in the 70s. 6 expressions of emotion that are recognized across the world, from Ohio to somewhere in New Guinea, that everyone recognizes. Happiness, happy, sad, angry, surprised, disgusted. Are those 6? Did I get all of them? But there are 6.
Yeah.
And you can see these are universal expressions. Now, there's a lot of combination expressions. There's also expressions of exertion or physical states. But these too are a window into figuring out how to make your mask. So there are books that I can recommend, but I recommend a mirror. A standing mirror, right, a table mirror, and you look at your face and you decide, what do I want to express? Do I want to express a deep sadness? Do I want to express anger? What's going on? Happiness and joy? Or what? So look at your face. What's the forehead and brows? What are the forehead and brows doing in this expression? And study them. What's happening in the eyelids? For example, in happiness, the risorius muscles lift the corners of the mouth. As they lift the corners of the mouth, either showing the teeth or not, it balls up the cheeks and they rise up. They become hard and round. As they rise up, they push up against the lower lid, deepening the crease under the lid, creating the lower lid into little boats. This is one of the ways you can see a real smile as opposed to a fake smile, right? This full blossoming of the face. Also the eyebrows, look, they become very round, they widen, and it's very expansive. If you look, you see this expansive expression, these round echoes like the ripples in a pond from a pebble. Now in anger, of course, all those features, they focus in. Love, see, expansive. Anger, see what happens? These brows, they knit in, very angular. You see this X. Right? Closed mouth or open mouth showing the teeth. And again, you see what happens with the eyes. That fierce laser beam focus is different. So, but again, you just kind of create a little equanimity and just study what is the constellation of features that creates anger and the specific kind of anger that you want to create. What's happening in the brows and the forehead? What's happening in the eyes and the lids? What's happening in the nose and the nostrils? The flared nostrils, the raised phalanges, the distinct nasolabial folds, because the mouth, right? So you can see it's very distinct when you break it down into the symbols and messages that the face is giving. You can now reproduce it. There's status in many mask cultures. It's refined, like in Bali, you have masks that are more and more refined and more coarse. So like demons and animals are more coarse. When you're showing your teeth or the lips are redder or wider, it's more animal, more coarse. When the features are very placid and unflappable, right, that's more refined. The colors that you use for your mask, right, colors can be very expressive. But also realize that colors are relative. There's a warm and a cool version of every color, right? I mean, yellow, right? What could be brighter than yellow? Now that's like a cadmium yellow medium. But if you look at yellow ochre, well, now that's a cool, earthy yellow. So it really depends how you use it, and what colors you put it up against. See, again, technique, and one has to study.
I really loved what you had said in your introduction was about like the importance of storytelling and the story behind a mask, and without that, the mask is not really meaningful. So like if a person is trying to like construct, in this ceremony of mine, a mask, one thing that they could do is maybe weave in some of their customs and mythologies and stuff like that. But let's say maybe they don't have access to that. Like how do you weave in like a storyline or symbolism? Do you try to like remember like an emotional experience that you had, or like any sort of advice or thoughts on that?
It's the intelligence behind the artwork that makes it meaningful, the conceptual underpinnings of the artwork. A mask without a story is just an empty shell. So I think that the mask arises from these internal dialogues. They are the peaks of the icebergs, right, that arise, that poke up from the surface of the deep ocean of thought that we are engaged in most of the time. And they really do reflect what lays beneath the surface. Mask movement is not natural movement, that it is stylized, it is refined. When I teach mask movement myself, we don't begin with verbalization. First, you try to find maybe a shape. What's the shape, a body shape of your character? What type of movement does your character do? And then maybe just sounds. What are like just some guttural sounds that your character might make? And then with all of those together, what words might come from that? Because otherwise we just go right to words and we forget our bodies. We stand up straight and we just move our, we just talk. And then it's just us. That's just us. So you really have to try to find a center.
I think that's amazing that to get to know a mask, you're going from like a pre-language state, sort of like this primordial state, and then you're building layer upon layer. And if you don't do that, then you just are sort of like, stuck in this like superficial world. And if you go from the absolute beginning and start layering it, that's when you get like the depth and the philosophy and the meaning of that mask. And in a way, that's sort of the storytelling too, because as you're building it, you're building that story.
Yes. It's getting beyond yourself.
Yeah.
It's why it's...
thanks so much for like spending all of this time with me. It's really meaningful. I really appreciate it. It's really, I found it very helpful. So thank you again.
I appreciate it. It's always fun to talk about all of this.
Yeah.
I don't plan these talks because I'm always curious at what's going to come out.
Yeah.
I never really know what's going to come out in any particular